everyone, and welcome to the Boundary Systems What's New in Creo Schematics 7 webinar today. We're going to be discussing the topics of what's new in Creo 7 Schematics today, and we'll have a short presentation of slides in conjunction with some demonstration in the software. So, part of information you should know about today's webinar. Everybody is in mute mode at this point so that we can keep background noise to a minimum. We're going to have a question and answer session at the end of today's presentation. Please go ahead and use the GoToMeeting interface to ask a question, and then I'll respond to that question to the entire group, as opposed to attempting to mute and unmute people and go through all of that. We have quite a few participants today, so it's best if everybody utilizes the GoToMeeting interface for asking questions and whatnot. So with that being said, we're going to kind of go ahead and dive into the content today and the topic of what's new in Creo 7 Schematics. And again, don't hesitate to, for those participants that are just joining here in the last couple seconds, don't hesitate to use the GoToMeeting interface to ask questions at the end of the presentation. Everybody's in, or you can ask the questions during the presentation and I'll address them at the end of the presentation, if you will. Everybody's in mute only mode so we can keep the background noise to a minimum with the number of participants that we have today. Okay, so with that being said, as I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and dive right in and go ahead and get started. So today's webinar agenda. Our objective is going to be to review and demonstrate the what's new stuff in Creo Schematics 7. We'll have a short introduction both about the company that is Boundary Systems and myself, just a little bit. We'll have a quick overview and some slides related to the topics that you see here. And then, as I mentioned, we'll wrap up at the end of the session with some Q&A. At the end of the at the end of the session for Q&A, we'll go ahead and put my contact information, company information, things to that effect on the screen during the question and answer part so that people can take a screenshot and, have the information necessary to follow up with us as we move forward. Okay, so with that being said, that's our agenda, and like I mentioned, we're going to kind of go ahead and work on through our agenda. So a little bit about me before we talk about the company that is Boundary Systems. I am somewhat of a resident manufacturing specialist at Boundary Systems. I handle a lot of the manufacturing parts of the software, whether that be the stuff slightly related to schematics, if you will, cabling, or manufacturing on the NC side, mold, all those types of things. I've been with the company working as a certified trainer since about 2007. I've been a Creo, or if you will, PTC, long ago and far away. It wasn't called Creo, but I've been a PTC user since about 2001. So I'm coming up on, or I guess I've officially attained my 20-year anniversary with the product now. Training, consulting, and implementation are typically duties that fall on my plate. And as well as support and help for our entire community here in the PTC ecosystem. One of the things that engineers like myself at Boundary do is provide assistance and question and answer and direct support as well to clients working with any of the PTC products. While I don't particularly specialize in the wind chill part of the PTC ecosystem, there are a host of engineers within the Boundary Systems team that do speak to that part of the product. So the team as a whole has somebody that speaks to pretty specifically all parts of the things that PTC does. And some of us are more specialist in some things, myself, schematics, manufacturing, etc., others in wind chill, as I mentioned. But the moral of the story is the company that is Boundary Systems is your single source to get help, get information, get things like these webinars, and continue to advance your ability to work in the PTC ecosystem. Boundary Systems is technology leader in the PTC ecosystem, if you will. Partners include, obviously, PTC, eTraj, and other technology companies that Boundary Systems works with in order to provide, best-in-class solutions to all of their clients. It's one of the 16 fastest-growing private companies in the greater Cleveland area. It's a part of the PDSVISION group of global companies. So Boundary Systems now, as clients work with Boundary Systems now, they enjoy the ability to enjoy a global footprint with Boundary Systems and the ability to speak to PTC ecosystem and work with our partners all around the world, so that divisions outside of the United States can enjoy, hopefully some more time zone applicable and language applicable support, if you will, and training, implementation, all of those things that we do at Boundary Systems. Capabilities overall include things like product lifecycle management. That's a big statement, involves a lot of things, obviously. So the depth of that is holistically available and handled through Boundary Systems. They can handle all parts of your product lifecycle management, both implementation, training, deployment, whatever it might be. Data management, obviously being a part of your product lifecycle management and a big part of the things that the Boundary Systems teams can speak to. CAD design and consulting. So obviously we do the stuff of the PTC mechanical CAD and consulting, training, supporting, answering questions to all of the clients that we work with in that ecosystem. Simulation, there's a host of different, both PTC simulation and other partnered simulation products that Boundary Systems is currently, advocating and supporting to our clients. Moldex 3D being an example of an aggregate, if you will, or directly outside the PTC ecosystem simulation products specific to plastic injection molding simulation. There are other simulation products that Boundary Systems works with as our clients' needs become specific or global and broad as it relates to simulation. We can speak to all the different parts of simulation with the best-in-class products that they offer. Product development itself is also a part of the things that Boundary Systems does and provides for clients. A little bit of the the awards and the context of recognition that's been applied to Boundary Systems. It's an Inc. 5000 recognized company, a Weatherhead 100 recognized company. There are major accreditations that Boundary Systems has received in the recent past, and those are listed here. PTC authorized certified training partner for all the things you see listed there in the PTC ecosystem. And that would obviously include the schematics that isn't, while explicitly listed there, it falls underneath the theory of the Creo heading, if you will. All things in that Creo product line, whether that would be schematics or Creo mold, for instance. This is PTC preferred service provider, meaning this is Boundary Systems is a solution provider that PTC is comfortable and typically does recommend to clients to get solutions implemented, get training as needed, and support the PTC clients on the ground. Some Boundary Systems solutions and partners that Boundary Systems works with in order to provide these best-in-class solutions to their clients are listed here, as I mentioned. Moldex 3D, KeyShot, Sigmaxim, obviously PTC at the top of the list. All of these things are software solutions that Boundary Systems can consult with and help clients with to implement to solve specific problems. Okay, so let's start talking. Now that we've talked a little bit about Sean and we've talked a little bit about what is the company Boundary Systems, let's talk a little bit about what's new in schematics. So we've got a few topics here that we'll cover about what's new in schematics, some of which can be shown, some of which can only be discussed. The telemetry example that I have on the screen is an example of something that is arguably not the easiest thing to show you. One of the enhancements that PTC has deployed in the Creo 7 release of schematics is the deployment of telemetry. So this is the stuff of diagnostic reporting now being enabled for Creo Schematics. And diagnostic reporting is obviously encouraged for people to take advantage of and use, because PTC is taking a very active role, as we understand it, in utilizing this information to understand how people use the product and improve it primarily. It's becoming a thing where, as we understand it, a lot of information is flowing into PTC from this, and it gives them a way to act on things and recognize commonality amongst problems or, user workflows that don't always make it to an SPR. All of us answer to somebody at the end of the day inside of our company, and it's not PTC. So ultimately, we're responsible to get work done, and it typically takes a first order priority to do that. So when we encounter frustrations and we're struggling along in the software and things to that effect, or the software crashes or something to that effect, and we just have to get through it at that moment. We just have to start it back up, go back to business, and we're grumpy and we grumble around in our cubicle or at our desk, and we go back to business and we go back to work and we get this thing done. At the end of the day, the frequency in which the PTC gets to understand that event, absent deploying things like telemetry, is very limited. All of us just don't get the time to think about the steps we took, what happened to get us there to this crash or otherwise problem in the workflow condition that we're having, and the time in the day just to cleave that off and sit down and make an SPR and go to ptc.com and fill everything out and get logged in. Everybody understands it's just not the easiest thing to make the time for that when it does occur, when it does occur, excuse me. The telemetry stuff is going to give PTC a lot of insight into the schematics product that they have not previously had. This is related to the quality agent and the session logger specifically. They are now installed with schematics. And as PTC mentions, these tools collect and send reports to PTC on the performance and usage of their Creo stuff. That's what it's intended to do. It also reports the system information of a user, serving as a medium to help PTC improve the quality of its products. So when they talk about the system information, they're talking about the hardware that you're running Creo on, in this case, Creo Schematics, and then obviously the version and build information of Schematics itself. So that if they get a report back from the quality agent that says, hey, Schematics just blew up, they understand what hardware it blew up on and what version of it was. And, they get limited information from the quality agent, about that event and that effect. So it does give them greater insight. It is encouraged, to participate in the quality agent reporting and those types of things, as it will definitely improve the schematics product on the long side. Because these things happen in the background and it's just a part of the way the application works and does what it does, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of tangible stuff I can show you in the product about this improvement. We can only discuss that it exists. There isn't a new button inside of Creo Schematics that we need to click to enable this. These are functionalities that, if they are typically enabled or disabled, those functionality controls are usually handled by the CAD administrative group or the user group that's installing and deploying and configuring Creo Schematics at the local installation. It's not stuff that is typically handled, if you will, on any kind of day-to-day basis or anything to that effect. And there is nothing for users to do or worry about, in a sense, as it relates to the improvements of telemetry. How that will be handled in your organization, again, will be likely determined by your CAD admin group as to whether or not they enable the diagnostic reporting and those types of things during the installation of Creo 7 Schematics, as that is the point in time when you do make the decision about whether or not to enable things like diagnostic reporting and the quality agent. Okay, so with that being said, next up on our agenda of what's new stuff in Creo 7 Schematics, we have a new and powerful and pretty cool find tool. This is going to be used for defining design and catalog items. And as you'll see during the demonstration, it's also kind of cool that you can just go find stuff and then locate it wherever it exists on this respective sheet. You can use the workflow of this tool to not only find the information and filter it, but to also subsequently locate those objects on the schematic sheet very quickly and easily. This new find functionality is applicable to both the design itself as well as the catalog. And it is selectable as to the scope. And when demonstration, it's selectable as it relates to the scope of where that search takes place. So if you are specifically looking for things from the catalog, you can specifically filter the find tool to share those things from the catalog to you, and not necessarily go looking on the design sheet for that thing that you may have already deployed. And the inverse is also true. If I wish to find a specific object or whatever the case may be on the design sheet, and I'm not looking for it to be found in the catalog because I am looking to locate the object on the sheet, then in that case, you'll be filtering only to the sheet, and you won't be like pulling up object definitions from the catalog, if you will. All right. It's a pretty robust interface for the find tool, if you will. You can search by design types, classes, diagram type, and for specific parameters with specific values. Search by parameter allows finding items with specific values and data sets. You can also search into the data sets themselves and find information there. So the find tool is a big enhancement that has come along in Creo 7, and it's typical. There's just a ton of objects in a schematic. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say typical. It is not unusual that PDC clients have an enormous amount of different objects on their schematics, whether it's fibers or whatever the object artifact type might be at the end of the day. There's always just a lot of stuff in most cases. Some folks get off easy and there isn't a lot to do on the schematic, but in my professional experience, more often than not, they are fairly busy. So the concept of being able to use something like this to locate things on the design, as well as locate things in the catalog to use on the design, is definitely a welcome addition to the schematics user world, if you will. Okay, so we'll be taking a look at this in the demonstration. We'll see how this new find tool works, and we'll see some of the functionality and things to that effect of it. Okay, so next up on the agenda that got changed is the design export functionality has been touched inside of Creo Schematics. So we have better quality of design export to different formats. So historically, there's a lot, everybody wants to output this stuff in different ways. It's all pretty much 2D flat stuff. So it creates an input diversity. I mean, nowadays, friends don't send friends IGES files anymore. So typically in the engineering 3D community, everybody's just sharing a step file nowadays. The exception to that typically being when people are, sharing native files. But when we get into products like Creo Schematics, and by comparison, generically speaking, AutoCAD or something to that effect, we're talking about flat paper stuff. And folks, have desire for a diversity in the output, types, and quality, insistence of its quality of that stuff that we can export into those flat states. Because it's flat state stuff, it does in fact lend itself to a host of different formats. It is a little difficult for PDC to keep up with the compatibility and the changes to all of these things, because things like the PDF standard get updated and AutoCAD stuff gets updated, and it's a thing that gets caught up to in a periodic way, and that is a part of what has transpired with our Creo 7 release, where they have spent some time to get the quality right in PDF exports and things to that effect, as well as improving some of the things that are going to be shown and not shown in the PDF export. That does become a thing that does interfere, or has historically interfered, in some workflows for some clients, and now those things are to be spoken to in Creo 7 in terms of exporting to PDF and being able to control the visibility of things better, and having that be respected by the output with a greater degree of consistency, if you will. Support for export to DXF, DWG, and for AutoCAD versions up to 2018. So while they haven't managed to catch all the way up to the year 2021 of AutoCAD support, if you will, they are up to release 18 now for the ability to export to a compatible release 18 standard of AutoCAD export from your schematic. I would assume that's probably something that they will continue to develop in advance. We haven't been given any indication on our side in in the support community, if you will, as to when additional more modern compatible formats and things to that effect will be supported. Arguably, I don't know that it's a deal breaker beyond functionality that I'm not aware of, as I'm not an AutoCAD user, inside of AutoCAD, and their ability to map schematic information to the more modern AutoCAD versions. There might be functionality in there in AutoCAD that they're not taking advantage of, but clearly we understand that even the most recent versions of AutoCAD will open pre-existing versions of their own product. So while they are not outputting to a 2020-2021 version of the AutoCAD DXF DWG standard, they're outputting to something pretty recent that should be openable in any version that is newer than what they're supporting. Now, that being said, I assume, I'm not an AutoCAD user, but I assume the restrictions in the AutoCAD space may be similar, that if this were to be output to the newer version standard, that older AutoCAD users, a user on the AutoCAD side receiving your export that might be in a 16 version or something like that, I cannot, as I am not an AutoCAD user, I cannot speak explicitly to their ability to open that more newly saved file out of Creo. My gut check as a user of these things over a great many years says probably not. So it probably does matter, and folks that may not have given thought to the type of DWG export DXF in terms of version and standard that they're outputting, if they are working with people or they have internal versions of AutoCAD that are maybe somewhat dated at this point, they may want to be conscious of those exports moving forward, because I cannot speak to if or not that PTC exporting a newer standard would cause a compatibility issue for an older version of AutoCAD. I would naturally assume the DXF is not vulnerable to that, but the DWG standard may be. I don't know, so I don't want to leave anybody with an impression that something is possible, and I am indicating that something is possible in a case where I am actually unsure. All right, so we also have improved export to HPGL for the users that might be working with that export type from Creo Schematics. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and start some webinar demo stuff, and we'll take a look at our Find tool and things to that effect inside of the new Creo Schematics 7 release. So fortunately for all of us, and I mentioned there'll be a couple more slides. We're going to punch those back up when we do our question and answer session here as we wrap up after the demonstration part. I'll pop those slides and stuff back up then. But for right now, we're going to bring Creo Schematics 7 to the forefront, and we will start the discussion and the demonstration, if you will, surrounding our Find tool inside of Creo Schematics 7. Now, some basic things to know that you arguably should need or arguably do need to know. Beyond the addition of the Find tool, the Creo Schematics 7 interface will be very familiar to you. It is, in fact, pretty much exactly concurrent to the previous Creo 4 schematics release in terms of the overall interface. Again, the exception to this change in the interface being the addition of our Find tool. Now, our Find tool is going to be found on the Data tab now inside of our Explore group. So inside of the Data tab on the Explore group is where we go get our little typical PTC go look for stuff binoculars. Now, Control F, as you see, as I'm kind of, I'm highlighting the button so that the tooltip is displayed. Control F as a typical Windows hotkey scenario for finding things is in fact respected here in this case. That being assuming you haven't done some other personal remapping of these types of things in your system in some way. So we'll go ahead and light up our Find tool. Now, when we light up our Find tool, we see it's got a very clean and simple interface that comes up for us to work with in terms of, searching and finding things. We can open previous things here as necessary. If we will, we can go open up a search settings file. We can save these types of searches out of the Find tool now. So if you have a typical thing or a typical process of searching a design or something to that effect at the end of a workflow or whatever the case may be, you can queue up those searches now and save this stuff off and then just kind of go recall it, as opposed to configuring all of the scope and parameter settings within the Find tool. Okay? So I don't have any of those saved, so we're going to cancel that, and we're just going to look at the Find tool for what it is. Now, our scope control is where we determine what exactly we're going to be looking in and what we're going to be looking for, if you will. Now, arguably, I wish they would have reordered myself the class and diagram types so it would flow more theoretically from left to right in a thinking standpoint, because we're searching in specific classes, if you will, here, the design and not classes, the search in of the design and the local or the local catalog. If I had one applicable here, we could also be looking in a central catalog and things to that effect if that was currently configured on my system. But it's not, as I am a trainer, not a day-to-day production user of Creo Schematics. Now, the diagram type is also a part of search in, and arguably that's Sean being, very, very picky about maybe how the dialogue got laid out. But I would have personally liked to see diagram type more grouped over to the search inside, because that is the same context. What am I looking in? The class is more the context of what you are looking for. In this case, I'm going to be looking for fibers, or I'm going to be looking for specific ports or sheets or whatever the case may be. All of this falls under the theory of scope, yes, and we are still going to go further, filter this down by respective parameters, but just so it's said, these are the controls inside of scope that give us the definition of what we're going to go find from a 10,000-foot view and where we're going to go find that thing, all right, or things, if you will, in that case. So that's the scope that we're going to deploy for our search example today. It's pretty straightforward to schematics users, what these things are, what these things mean. If you're new coming into Creo Schematics, I would encourage the Creo Schematics training class, as it'll bring light to what all these definitions are talking about. When we speak to the class objects and we see things like block and group and port that might not be obvious on the face of them. If I've got participants today that are totally new to all things Creo Schematics, the understanding of what all those things are and how they work and what they do on the schematic, those are things that we do cover and discuss in the class if they aren't absolutely obvious as to the type of control that is right now today. Okay, so that's what we're going to scope look in. So what are we going to go find? How are we going to go, or I should say, how are we going to go find it? And, what information do I want from what I find? So in this case, I'm saying I want the color information to be shown on the result of what comes back, and I want the name of this object to be shown also. Now, there's, obviously, quite a significant list of stuff here, because schematics is incredibly data parametric. So all of these parameters, all these types of things, this is typical familiar stuff to all of the current Creo Schematics users. Again, those that I might have participating today that haven't been exposed to schematics previously, these represent different types of things and the parameters associated with those things. So this gives us a theory of what do I want to go bring back about this in this case. Now, clearly not everything applies to all objects in many cases. If you're using schematics, some things might not be applicable to you in all cases for the way and what you're doing for it here. in some object scopes are not going to be applicable to all parameters, obviously. If I'm looking for things like fibers, as I am in this example, certain parameters that I might see here are arguably not applicable necessarily to that, like length, for instance, if you will. And there are other, NCC count, NOC count, those are things related to relays. That's not going to be applicable to a fiber. So turning on that parameter in this case doesn't necessarily benefit me. The reason that, to come a little full circle here, that we have the save functionality as it relates to this new find tool is because PTC recognizes that there is a lot of depth here, and there is a lot of backside to all things schematics in terms of these types of things. Another parameter that would be notably important for Creo cabling, or clients that are using both Creo Schematics and Creo cabling, would obviously be the model name, as that's what we use to connect between Schematics and the Creo 3D Creo cabling universe to make the Schematics parameters applicable to a 3D model inside of Creo. We are always working with transferring the model name as part of that process. So there isn't going to be model names on fibers. So again, that's arguably not the most applicable selection if I were to keep model name in this case. All right. So basically we've determined, the stuff we want to go find. I want the color and I want the name. Now I'm not putting anything in here, so I'm just going to go get everything. And because I scoped this to the design, when I click find, it comes over here and it brings up my, as they're defining it, reports results. And this will be a typical interface, or a familiar interface, I should say, to previous Creo Schematics users. So in this case, we see our report, results as they're stating, and we see the color information being presented as a parameter that I wanted to be shown. We see a line number that's basically indexing these things. We see the class and the diagram type that it was found on. Where is this? Where are all these fibers that I found? Because for the savvy people that were paying attention, they know when I was on my scope definition over here, I just said go find it anywhere. Well, where did Creo find it? It found it on the wiring diagram. It didn't find it in the BID or whatever the case may be, or a circuit diagram, if you will. So it gives information about the scope depth back to you as to where things were brought about. If I were selecting multiple things like the local catalog as well as the design, I would be given information here, that would communicate that to me that, hey, these things are in these different scope locations. But as you see, the parameters that I added are both brought in here to my result as well. And we see the names of these fibers and we see their respective colors. And, you could start pulling things like spool information and harness data, and all kinds of stuff in here to use this both as a design validation tool that can be very quick and easy to use, because we go in and we save these search setups to be something that we want, so I can just recall that search setup at some design stage to validate the presence of objects or not, and things to that effect. So there are tools that do that now, and we do recognize that. But I think personally there may be a degree of a little bit more elegance here in how quick and easy this could be set up and saved to do design validation searching on the actual documents themselves, especially for those schematics users that that both I've seen and not seen and worked with in the past that have levels of enormous complexity on their schematics, and the level of cross-sheeting and things are just enormous. A tool like this, I think, is going to be an enormous benefit to those users. We can obviously expand on using this by clicking right on these objects in the results window. I can simply double click one of these objects here in the window, and it's going to take and scale my view and highlight and bring me specifically to that object on the screen at that time, just by double clicking on the object here inside of the reports list. So not only can I validate the presence by a quick search of this W10 blue wire, but I can quickly and easily, by clicking on it, validate what the heck it looks like on the schematic and where it lives, and, where it goes, and all those types of things. So it gives me a very quick and easy way to interact with the schematic globally. At the same time, I might be interacting with the design catalog. Now, one of the things that's came to my mind, and I can't claim to be a production schematics user, but this is something that comes to mind for me, is the saved, with our ability to scope to the saved local catalog. In some cases where we were using a standardized design, it feels to me like this tool could be used to validate the presence of or equality, if you will, that all of the design catalog items were used in the design. And again, I don't, as a non-production user, I don't claim that that's terribly important, I guess, or that it is of any, direct value to even a specific subset of users. But it does seem like something that might be possible in a much easier way now than maybe what we were able to do historically. If there is a value in validating that my design sheets, in fact, contain all of the objects, the same objects that are present from a catalog, it seems like that should be a pretty easy thing to set up and save here and structure to be able to validate designs on at some stage of the process to confirm an equality between the design catalog and the actual, design itself and the sheets themselves. So the find tool will hopefully be something that brings to bear a host of new ways that people can take advantage of these things in their workflows and utilize this to find objects, both, as we say, inside central and local catalogs, and within the scope controls and all the stuff they have here. I think it is a very nice touch that they've allowed us to save and retrieve these types of things. At the risk of full disclosure, I'm not certain about configuration settings that control a retrieval directory or anything like that yet from an administrative standpoint. I need to do Creo 7 Schematics is new, and we're still working through with PTC to find all the right people to get all the little information and stuff to that effect with. I didn't get any documentation related to administration side that indicates, how and where we might manage file storage of these saved searches in or out of wind chill environments yet. That's not information that, unfortunately, I should start with. That's not information that I know as of yet that I have to save with folks. If that's something that you're interested in, my contact information is going to come up on the screen here in the not too distant future, and take a screenshot of that, and don't hesitate to reach out to me in a couple of weeks or whenever it motivates you. I may not know anything tomorrow yet, but don't hesitate to reach back out to me and see if I do come to an answer for some of that stuff as a follow-up in terms of administering the storage file and folder to be sharing these things among users, in terms of save searches and things to that effect. It's just, unfortunately, I haven't been able to connect those dots in advance of this webinar yet to know for certain what the little details are on that stuff yet. But don't hesitate to come and email and pester on me to help motivate me to get that information if it's valuable to you. By the time you reach out, I may already have it. I just don't have it today. Okay, so with that being said, that's a 10,000-foot view of the nature of our new Find tool and its functionality inside of the new Creo 7 Schematics release. when we speak to this. We're going to close this off. The other part of things they mentioned is related to our design export functionality. So when we select or elect, if you will, to export designs from Creo Schematics, the enhancements that I mentioned on the slide are basically back there. They're in the background for you and available to take advantage of. In terms of environment change, you see here that we've got DWG versions up to 2018 and such, as far as that goes. And that's pretty simple stuff. It's not a big change in terms of the user's interaction with this type of export or anything to that effect. But this would be where we would work with those things. Now I'll come full circle again just briefly and state that I can't speak to backwards compatibility inside of AutoCAD. And again, if you were to come in here and, for instance, utilize the 2018 default version of this export, and somebody has an older version of AutoCAD than that, I am very sorry and I apologize. I cannot speak to the viability of them being able to open that. It is worth noting that, and the reason I am stressing that to my participant group today, it is the new default for 2018. In my experience, I'd be a liar if I said that I have not encountered a number of clients out there that continue to very effectively, I might add, use much older versions of AutoCAD. So I'm saying these things because I do expect that if that condition does exist, it could potentially trip somebody off that's exporting in this context, because you might, if you don't know it in your own organization, the recipients, a lot of times people are using much older versions of AutoCAD because they do serve the needs of that client. So do be conscious of that. Our new default is the 2018 stuff. So that is something to note. If you've historically been getting an older version or defaulting that out to an older version and changing that or something, then you would continue to want to make that part of your process for sure. Okay, but that's basically where we would come in here and take advantage, if you will, of the new export changes and updates. The rest of this is arguably largely related to the context of improved export as it relates to PDFs and things to that effect. So in this case, I'm gonna not scale the sheet, and I'm gonna go ahead and select my export file here. We'll just put this on my desktop. We'll say demo, and we'll export this PDF. I'm going to update my graphical information before proceeding. Okay, so it makes sure that everything has been refreshed. Okay, and it gave me an error when I exported my PDF. So I may need to, there may be a problem in the design inherently that I need to address, and that's why it's refusing to export the PDF. Typically, we would, prior to exporting and things to that effect, it's typical that, I would do, design validation and things to that effect. And arguably, I'm not doing that today. I just opened up one of PTC's documents from the from the training files for the purpose of our discussion and stuff today. So there is most likely a problem in this design, and I didn't arguably pick maybe the best file to show a PDF export. But arguably, the stuff of exporting to PDF now, PTC has made a meaningful effort at making sure that these exports are more graphically correct, with what you see is what you get theory, meaning that you won't get PDF results that look notably different than your schematic on the screen. You still have the same types of controls in terms of these things that you've had previously, if you will, in terms of fonts and things and stuff to that effect. But there has been a meaningful effort made to improve this stuff and get a better quality of result of the PDF export, as I mentioned. And the same would be said for the HPGL exports as well. A lot of that stuff is in the background. It's not really something that lends itself to a demonstration, but they've made a lot of, they recognize that sharing of data is an important part of schematics, and they've worked hard to make improvements on that to make sure that these things are being updated and that sharing of data has a greater degree of compatibility and moving forward. Okay, so with that, we'll pull up some slide stuff here of some things that are important. If you want to know more about Creo Schematics or Creo Schematics 7 specifically, our webinar topic presenters regarding this and any other topic in the Creo ecosystem, everybody on the team is a certified PTC trainer in what they do, and everybody's ready to help, even if it's not Creo 7 Schematics on the menu. Training is available currently virtually due to the COVID complications that virtually everybody on Earth is undergoing at the moment. We are still offering with certain, obvious social distancing, mask requirements, etc. Implications. We are still offering training in-center and on-site to clients when it's permissible for us to come in and operate within the client's COVID regime currently, for lack of a better description. Everybody has a diversity of policies and how they are approaching those things, and arguably, obviously, even if they are permitting on or off-site types of in-person training. We don't want clients to go without training and go without the benefits of training and support. So please note that everything Boundary Systems is and does in person. The company is working very hard and has very successfully created an environment where we can continue to support people virtually as necessary inside of the current timeline of COVID, if you will. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. Either that's on the technical side or the sales side, because we will work very hard to work within the boundary and the rules and the complications that we have in the current timeline, if you will, to make getting people help, training, support, implementation, whatever it is. We'll work very hard to make sure we can get those things done within the restrictions that exist at the time that those things need to be done. Check for the website for the full schedule of classes that are being offered, and that is updated, frequently as the scheduling of classes changes and things are added and things to that effect. So I definitely encourage everybody to pay attention to the website. Arguably, if you need more information about anything Creo Schematics or anything otherwise Creo ecosystem, or there is some way that Boundary Systems, whether that comes from product lifecycle management, CAD data, mechanical CAD creation, simulation, all the things we talked about, don't hesitate to reach out to our sales team if there is a solution that you think exists or that we can provide that might be helpful. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. Even if you have wind chill questions, it's okay to reach out to Sean. Full disclosure, I'm going to call a lifeline, and one of the better capable engineers on our team for those things will be right away to assist you. But it's anybody, all of the people on our team take all of the questions from everybody all of the time. We know the team on our own team who needs to answer that question, if in that case it's not us. But the moral of the story that we're projecting to everybody is ask the question, contact us, let us help you at any time. And if the person you reached out to isn't the most qualified individual to help you, the rightly qualified individual will be assigned, and we will get this taken care of. So keep that in mind. We're here for that. Content just like what we created today, and an enormous amount of it now, is available on the Boundary Systems YouTube channel. There are a host of very popular webinars for PTC web client, or PTC Creo and Windchill clients, and otherwise simulation topics as well are discussed on the Boundary Systems YouTube channel. And arguably, there's just an enormous amount of this type of webinar content available for all of that type of stuff. And we encourage you to visit the Boundary Systems YouTube web channel and take a look at those things for, as it relates to anything that, you might, feel like you can benefit more information from. The webinars are always presented by technical instructors like myself, and working hard to provide, real world depth to whatever the topic is to the best degree we possibly can. So don't hesitate to reach out to the website and or to the Boundary Systems YouTube channel. That being said, if you're in trouble and you're having one of those kind of Creo days where you might not have nice things to say about Creo or Creo Schematics or whatever, it's okay to hit the website and click support ticket. And we'll be there to help you, or figure out what's going on and do what we can to help ease the frustration. Reach out to the support group, and things will be assigned appropriately based on the need in question, whether that's a simulation problem, manufacturing issue, schematics, wind chill, whatever it is. The right people get assigned, and we get help going as soon as humanly possible to the clients. So don't hesitate to take advantage of those things. Boundary Systems is here and working very hard in spite of the COVID complications to continue to do everything we can to support clients throughout the PTC ecosystem. So that's my contact information. It's going to stay on the screen. We got a couple of questions to speak to here. Does special text type, such as with rounded box, export to PDF now? I can't speak to that specifically. I haven't specifically run that test. I can run that test today, and I will have that information later. Don't hesitate to follow up with me, in the coming days, and I'll see what's going on with that. But unfortunately, I didn't come prepared for that particular question right out of the gate to have something that I can pull up that represents that, and we could test it right on the fly and know what the current standard is for if that issue's been resolved. But I will work to know myself what that answer is, and don't hesitate to reach out to me in the near future to find out what I know. And I am sorry, I do apologize today. I don't know specifically if that is something that has been resolved or not. Will this presentation be available after the meeting concludes? Absolutely. Our marketing people are awesome, and they do an amazing job of digesting all of this stuff that the technical people do, and they get it packaged and bundled and up on the YouTube Boundary Systems channel in fairly short order. I don't work in their department, so I am not intimately involved in knowing what the lead time of that is, but I would expect within the next, I would just, as a guess, expect within definitely the next couple of weeks is probably a fair statement. It will probably happen notably faster than that, but I'm going to try and not put my colleagues in a bad place and over-promise for them in a case where it's not my space. I would definitely say within a couple of weeks, the entirety of this webinar, like all of the other webinar content we do, will be on the Boundary Systems YouTube channel, and it'll be accessible as a playback video anywhere, anytime for anybody. So absolutely, yes, very good question, and yes, that content will be available. I just can't speak explicitly to the timeline that it becomes available, but I do not expect it to be, an enormous delay. They do a really good job of getting that stuff squared away, and I wouldn't expect it to take very long. Okay, has XML function changed? Please run through it. Okay, very quickly, yes. So in terms of exporting XML, so we're going to export XML. And this is arguably the same universe that we had prior. Nothing is different about XML. Arguably, validating it is still just as important as it ever was, in my opinion, until shown otherwise by PTC. If you're exporting this type of stuff for for Creo cabling, etc., those types of things, absolutely, positively continue to do XML validations and stuff on that before you send it out. As it stands today, I do not have enough test seat time to determine that, the validation and the importance of that validation as part of the XML process is somewhat lessened. I would assume that it is still equally significant now as it ever was, because it's not just about, catching something that PTC might have done wrong on the design that didn't turn out as you want, but it also works to catch, conflict and things that might lack compatibility on the other side. So, but the XML process is absolutely unchanged in that. You would export your XML to a file, in this case, and we'll call it demo, as far as that goes. and we would simply go ahead and export our whole design or the current sheet, how we're handling warnings and duplicate reference designators, those types of things. These controls haven't changed a bit. Typically, I don't know, unless you're using the export for something other than cabling or piping, I can't speak professionally to what that, what validation you may or may not need on the XML side. As I was mentioning, if you're talking about punching this stuff out as XML for the purpose of cabling, yeah, definitely, or piping, yes, definitely. We're going to select that specifically, and we're going to make sure that we validate the XML. And, this design has notable problems, if you will, in it, and invalid thickness settings, invalid minimum bending, object types are missing, stuff to that effect. It's very likely that had a lot to do with my problems on PDF export previously. This design might be something that's used for checking that stuff in the purpose of training. I just pulled up, something recent for the purpose of our webinar today. So, validating and exporting XML, same as it ever was. Export to XML is now complete. We see that feedback down in the lower the lower left-hand corner of the screen, and it would have subsequently created my demo XML file that I would subsequently be using as logical reference data. And typically, not always, I recognize that schematics may be exported via XML to other products, but in most typical cases, we're talking about piping or cabling inside of Creo Parametric. And now I have that XML file that I can utilize for that logical data in those disciplines inside of Creo Parametric, whether that be the piping or the cabling side. Very good questions. Will you be testing if saving in Schematic 7 is slow? Okay. I don't have, this is probably one of the larger designs that I would have to test with in our current environment. In the context of this webinar, a client design could not be used for the reasons that everybody participating in this webinar understands, but I don't have a bigger design than this available that I could utilize and show today. We'll go ahead and click save on this design and see what it takes. I recognize very clearly that this design isn't much compared to the depth that many of our clients have to work with in terms of schematics. This is probably not indicative of a typical expectation of what it can be to save a design. Now, that being said, so clients know, saving a design is arguably bigger than just saving a design. Depending upon how you are working with Creo Schematics, and for instance, whether or not you are inside of Windchill, whether or not all or parts of the schematic design that you are saving will be located on a remote network drive as opposed to the local computer. In all cases where those parameters, for lack of a better description, exist, the network and its speed or bandwidth, if you will, become an integral part of the time to save objects. A very good comparison of saving objects and performance improvements will always take place in the client environment as opposed to my own and things to that effect, because we lack that commonality of the network delivering these files through Windchill, or the network possibly delivering simply file I/O because the objects are being saved in simple Windows file and folder structures, but they in fact reside on remote network drives. Whenever those processes are involved, we are also dealing with the network implications of saving. But I'll go ahead and save on this design real quick. I'm clicking the button right now, and it did it instantly. But arguably, in the context of design depth of what I've seen within our PTC clients and schematics, I wouldn't have expected different. But there's not a lot of good comparison here. We're definitely not apples to apples with this. I'm saving a small design to a local drive outside of Windchill. That's going to be madly different than the environment that a great majority of our schematics clients operate in. Okay, is the central catalog the same as prior versions? Yes, everything about the central catalog is unchanged as it's been communicated to us and we understand it. Existing central catalog functionality migrates, no harm, no foul, no questions, if you will, and there are no changes necessary or implications as it relates to Creo 7 deployment specific to the central catalog. Everything about it, everything about working with it, everything about accessing it, all of those types of things is all still the same. Very good questions. Otherwise, I appreciate everybody's participation today. Thank you so much for joining us for the What's New in Creo Schematics 7 webinar. Again, come looking for this content at the Boundary Systems YouTube channel in the not too distant future. And don't hesitate to follow up with me as necessary about things that I couldn't answer today or things that arguably may come along later as it relates to whether it be Creo Schematics or anything in the PTC ecosystem. And with that, I thank everybody for their participation today. I wish everybody a great day, and I look forward to seeing you on our next Boundary Systems webinar. Thank you, and have a great day.